So for the past couple of weeks, I had been working on my next historic film review video for the channel, and I was almost done. I was so close to being done with that video. Until last week, a colleague of mine said, hey, there's this film that's in theaters right now. So good, you gotta check it out. It's a Godzilla movie. It's called Godzilla -1. And I'm like, oh, a Godzilla film. I don't know about that. There are so many other things I could do with my time. You know, like, I don't know, watching my dog lick his nuts for an hour.
Oh my God, that was so funny.
And that's because I was thinking about the past Godzilla films I had seen, and well, let's just say I can never get that time back. But he told me it wasn't an American film, it was produced in Japan, and it's really, really good. So I was like, okay, let's do it. And he was right. It was a really good film. In fact, I liked it so much that same night I came back home and I decided to watch for the first time the original 1954 Godzilla film that was also produced in Japan. And well, I fell asleep, probably made it through about 50% of the film. So I tried watching it again a couple days later, and I gotta say, I really liked it. This was 1954, and the special effects they used were very innovative. And on top of that, this film was produced shortly after the end of World War II. So it was very much so influenced by the events that had taken place, as well as the aftermath of the war, which they were currently in the middle of. When you think about the special effects and everything that went into it, you know, this is also a time where resources are limited for a lot of countries because of the war. And so it's really impressive being aware of all those, you know, external factors that impacted the way the final product of the film appears. So when you take in all those external factors into consideration, the film becomes even more impressive. You know, these folks took direct inspiration from the events that transpired during World War II. And so there's a lot of interesting facts about this film that I'm gonna get into in this video. So instead of giving a play-by-play breakdown of the plot of the film like I typically do, in this video I'm going to dive in a bit more into like the behind the scenes stuff that took place, you know, how the special effects were made, the scoring, the people involved, things like that. Oh, and if you like what you see, subscribe to the channel.
What the hell?
Godzilla is a Japanese film that was released in 1954, and it's considered to be a classic in the kaiju genre of Japanese films. Kaiju is a subgenre within science fiction that features giant monsters in Japanese film and television. And the film Godzilla was produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka, directed and co-written by Ishirō Honda, and produced by Toho Company Ltd. If you're a fan of anime like myself, you might be familiar with some of Toho's anime titles, like Dr. Stone, My Hero Academia, as well as Jujutsu Kaisen. So they're very relevant within the anime sphere, but with that being said, Godzilla is still to date their most famous title. The film starred Akira Takarada, Momoko Kochi, Akihiro Harada, and Takashi Shimura.
Nani?
And I apologize to anybody out there who's Japanese or speaks Japanese, and I am botching the shit out of these names. I am so very sorry. I promise you I am doing my best. Looking at the Godzilla franchise across the board, it includes a whopping 38 films, 33 of which were produced in Japan, and the remaining 5 being produced in America. Honestly, it's pretty overwhelming. If you Google like, you know, Godzilla, it's just a slew of shit. If you want to be like, hey, I want to watch the original Godzilla or this specific one, be prepared to sift through all the Godzillas. Overwhelming. So if you've been living under a rock and you don't know anything about Godzilla, I'll give you a little overview of the general plot. Godzilla is a science fiction film about a giant prehistoric sea creature named Godzilla, or Gojira. Nuclear weapons testing awakens the monster, and it's been mutated by the radiation. And prior to nuclear testing, it had lived peacefully in deep waters for thousands of years, with the exception of rearing its ugly head every once in a while. And, you know, in order to appease him, the local villagers would give him a sacrifice. A young girl, of course. So with the exception of, you know, that minor issue, life is pretty peaceful for folks, you know, and Godzilla, he went on about his way. However, due to nuclear fallout, it not only mutates Godzilla, but it also kills all the fish in the local area, which is the monster's sustenance. So he's hungry, and obviously he's pretty pissed.
All I've had today is like 6 gummy bears and some scotch.
As a result, Godzilla then wreaks havoc on the citizens all across Tokyo. When the film was released in Japanese theaters, it set a record, having earned the highest first-day sales in Tokyo. In fact, 9.69 million tickets were sold, so it was a hit. It was very successful. Now, I already mentioned that the original Godzilla is heavily inspired by World War II, and I want to dive into that a little bit because it's very interesting. Tanaka, the producer of Godzilla, was inspired by the fallout left by the US hydrogen bomb test in the Marshall Islands. And if you're not familiar with what these events were, these tests were part of an operation created by the United States called Operation Castle. And they let loose a 15 megaton hydrogen bomb. And to put that into better context, in case you don't know what megatons are in measurements of bombs, because I know I'm not, familiar myself. So I read that it was equivalent to 1,000 little boys. And I'm not talking about your nephew, your little brother, your little son. No, I'm talking about a bomb that was named Little Boy. Little Boy was the bomb that was used to attack Hiroshima during World War II. What a fucked up name to give a bomb. The nuclear fallout was devastating and made its way to men, women, and children in the local area. Even though they called themselves, evacuating this area within the Marshall Islands, but they didn't realize or take into consideration the nuclear fallout that would happen afterwards and how far the blowback would be. So over 200 people were harmed as a result of this testing. And of the United States victims, a Japanese fishing crew also contracted radiation poisoning due to the fallout. And it was these real life events that served as the inspiration for the original Godzilla film. Tanaka is even quoted as saying, "The theme of the film from the beginning was the terror of the bomb. Mankind had created the bomb, and now nature was going to take revenge on mankind." It becomes clear that this film is about man's folly when it comes to screwing around with nuclear weapons. One of the many things that this film does very well is demonstrating or replicating the destruction of nuclear weapons on land, on people. It's truly terrifying and also remarkable. When the camera pans across the screen after Godzilla finishes his destruction, it literally looks like a land devastated by a nuclear attack. I can only imagine how people felt in Japan in theaters watching this just a few years after the events of World War II. There were people that were still living that were there when the bombs dropped. They were in Nagasaki or in the surrounding areas. And imagine going to theaters and seeing this. I can't even begin to imagine how much that hit people, mentally, emotionally in theaters. You see flattened buildings and not one person standing. You really feel the devastation throughout the screen. So with all that being said, in 1956, an American version was released after Toho sold the rights to film distributor and producer Joseph Levine for $25,000. And the original version was renamed Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And it was heavily edited from the original film. And of course, Joseph Levine, he could do what he wanted to do. He bought the rights outright, it is what it is. However, I'm gonna just keep it a buck. It is a bastardized version of the original, because you bet your ass I watched not just the 1954 Japanese version, but also the 1956 American version, because I was not going to just, talk about it and give my 2 cents based on what people are saying on the internet and different sources without checking it out myself. For starters, they shaved 40 minutes off of the original 1 hour and 36-minute film, and the storyline remained the same for the most part. Obviously there is a monster that comes and, fucks up the area and devastates the land and the people. However, the whole tone, the whole narrative behind the film, the core inspiration is essentially completely removed. And it was these elements that made the original film so impactful, because it was obviously heavily influenced by World War II and the aftermath of the war. And the creators of the American version really went out their way to minimize this connection, if not completely sever it altogether. New scenes were inserted featuring a Canadian actor named Raymond Burr, and what they did was mix a combination of original footage with new footage featuring Burr to make it look as if he was part of the original film. But in all honesty, I'm just gonna be honest here, it looks kind of ratchet. It don't look good. I mean, of course, I'm gonna give, you know, the American version the same grace as I give the Japanese version, you know, when it comes to the fact that this is the mid 1950s. They don't have access to the same technology and tools that we have access to today. Duh. I understand that. However, when you take a perfectly fine film that is really great, like it's more than fine, it's awesome, and then you do all this stuff to it, and that's the best you can do, don't even bother. I'm just being honest here. That's just my opinion. If you got a problem, we can fight about it. I'm actually a lover. I don't like to fight. Agree to disagree. But, you know, hear me out. This is where I'm coming from, okay? In this American version, the events are narrated like a story by a man named Steve Martin, who Burr is playing. And so it's all from his perspective. In the original, there is nobody narrating, you know, it's literally just people talking to each other and events transpiring, whatever that is called in cinema storytelling. I don't know. And it makes sense that they would do this. You know, it was actually kind of smart because this is their way of getting past the Japanese language, because this film is created to target an American audience. So it makes sense, you know, it's actually kind of smart. However, it's not enough.
Nope.
So Steve Martin, this main character, is a foreign correspondent for a US news outlet, and he just happened to stop in Tokyo on his way to Cairo. And, you know, he is essentially the main character. It's pretty remarkable how they were able to take a whole new character, insert it, like shoehorn it, and make that character the main character. And also, the way they shoehorn this new main character is hilarious. They'll have him and a body double, which is an actor who's presently with him in this scene, who's supposed to represent an original actor from the original Japanese film. They'll have him and that person in that scene, right? To make it appear as though he is talking to the original actor. But the problem with this is that it's so obvious that it is not the original actor. It's like, you know, you think about one of those scenes where you have the actor in the scene and then they're doing some like dynamic movement or something, and then they get a stunt double, and it's a really bad one because they don't make it so that it's hard to tell that this is a different person. You know, they get real like lazy with it, end up hiring a stunt double that looks absolutely nothing like the original actor, and you're like, who the hell is that? That's the type of energy that it's giving. In addition to the body doubling, the dubbing, the voice dubbing is so bad. There's this one scene that stands out to me where Emiko is talking to Dr. Sawazawa, and there is a voice dub for both of them.
But there is something far more important which I must show you. Come with me.
So they're having this conversation, voice dub, whatever. 2 minutes later, they then reconvene to talk again, just 2 minutes later. It's like a whole different person is talking. Whole different voice.
But there is something far more important which I must show you.
The world must not know of this. Promise to keep my secret.
What?
Sawazawa sounds like a totally different human being. It might have been the same voice actor. Maybe he needed a lozenge that day, or I don't know. But I'm telling you, it did not sound like the same person just 2 minutes later. And then sometimes not only did like just the general voice change, but sometimes like the dialect altogether. Sometimes the voice actor would be using this like Dick Tracy voice. That's what I like to call it. You know, like that voice from the 1950s, where you think about those old black and white movies and they're like, look, you dame, Godzilla, he's a monster. You see? I won't ever do that again, I promise. So anyway, then it'll jump from something like that, a dialect like that, to someone who it sounds like is like a English speaker who's trying to pretend that they're English as a second language speaker, who has like a thick accent from their native tongue, and it comes off a little racist, you know? And it sounds terrible. God, what is that old movie that was incredibly racist, that had that one character where they were trying to depict a Chinese American man? It was just so bad.
That was 2 weeks ago. You cannot go on or keep ringing my bell. You disturb me.
It kind of reminds me of that. The dubbing was just all over the place. And what's crazy is that the American version ended up becoming very successful, more successful than the original. And believe it or not, I believe that in Japan, they ended up rebranding to make it more into like the Godzilla, King of the Monsters type of branding, because of how much more popular that was when it came out than the original. If you are looking at the original Godzilla through a 2024 lens, then of course, you know, the special effects, mediocre at best. And that's obviously because of the technology we have at our disposal today. But I had to keep reminding myself this watching the film, and I know that sounds really silly, but sometimes I kept forgetting because you become accustomed to films that use high quality CG and things like that. With the exception of this piece of shit. You know, I personally feel like the original Godzilla's special effects eats this. This was just hot garbage. But I digress. The first time I watched it, the time when I fell asleep, my initial reaction to the special effects was, oh my God, those are cute little replicas. So adorable. And I feel a little bad for saying that because I'm pretty sure that was not the creator's intended or hopeful reaction from audiences. It was the second watch through that it hit me really hard that these are amazing. Someone put their blood, sweat, and tears into the creation of this set. It is remarkable. And I know I keep throwing that word around throughout this whole video. Remarkable, remarkable, remarkable. But I mean, really, it is remarkable because it was so successful in conveying just pure devastation. The special effects were directed by a man named Eiji Tsuburaya, and I apologize if I mispronounced his name. This guy changed Japanese cinema and was a master in special effects at that time in the kaiju film genre. When Toho was founded in 1936, he was hired on as the lead in the special effects department. And then World War II happened, and everything changed, of course. And during World War II, he was drafted to work on war propaganda films. And actually, in 1945, he experienced the napalm bombing of Tokyo. And this was an attack launched in the dead of night by none other than the United States against Japan, and it was called Operation Meeting House. The United States loves their goofy ass names. It's so crazy how they like to add the most trivial sounding like little names to the most devastating shit. Because this was one of the most destructive bombing raids in human history. And Tsuburaya survived this attack. And then after World War II ended, he went right back to work at Toho. And when Tsuburaya returned to work and he started working on Godzilla, he made a very interesting decision. He decided to use a combination of miniatures, photography, and special effects instead of stop motion animation, which was very popular at this time. And it was the way he executed these approaches together that made the special effects extraordinary. First off, he pioneered what's called suitmation, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Godzilla is actually an actor in what I imagine to be a very hot and uncomfortable rubber suit. And actually, I know it was hot as shit because I read that every day people would have to take the suit and line it in like cotton and stuff just to get the sweat out of it for the actor. Suitmation ended up working out very well for this film because someone wearing a suit allowed for the creature to move in more dynamic ways, and it makes it a bit more realistic looking. And so in addition to all of these approaches, he also used miniatures, as I mentioned earlier. And I mean, these miniatures, it's just like a beautiful replica of Tokyo. It is so cool. And it's not just buildings, it's cars. They even have like, little power lines There's even a train that's moving on like, the train tracks. It is so cool. And I'm sorry, I know it's not meant to be cute, but it is cute as shit, okay? So you got this man in a hot ass rubber monster suit just stomping on little replicas. And this was super unique and genius for its time. In addition to all that, you've also got pyrotechnics, and they were able to simulate explosions and fires when Godzilla is rampaging across the city. Gasoline would be sprayed on the miniatures and, set ablaze. They would also insert little small cracks into some of the miniatures to make it easy for the actor to be able to stomp and destroy the little miniatures. And it's this destruction that adds that layer of realism. We know it's a man in a suit stomping on miniatures, but it's truly impressive work. You can really tell that Tsuburaya put everything into this film. And they also used what's called rear projection, where some scenes used pre-recorded footage, and that footage was projected onto a screen behind live actors and the miniature set. There was also a lot of water involved, and this would be done by a stagehand who would turn over barrels of water into a water tank. And I mean, this guy thought of everything. Toho even hired 400 part-timers to work on the special effects and the optical effects to bring this whole idea to life. And these folks had zero experience and they turned it out. So like, for example, someone as part of this crew would work on creating the giant footprints in the sand that's supposed to represent Godzilla's footprints, things like that. How cool would that be, man? I would love to do something like that. That sounds like so much fun. Godzilla's scoring is very iconic. Even if you've never seen Godzilla, not one Godzilla film that uses it, the original scoring, that's like the Godzilla theme. At least most people do, I think. I do. And I never even watched the original Godzilla. The film's score was composed by Akira Ifukube. Again, my apologies. Throughout his entire career, Ifukube composed over 250 film scores. In addition to scoring, he also created Godzilla's roar. And when I found out how he created Godzilla's roar, I was like, I was just shocked. I would have never guessed it. It was created by rubbing a resin-covered leather glove along the loosened strings of a double bass. Did you guess that? That's mad specific, bruh. And then Godzilla's footsteps were created by hitting an amplifier box. Did you guess that one?
Everybody's so creative.
I've always been curious about people who make a living by creating sound effects for films and movies and TV shows. That sounds like such a fun job. You ever seen one of those clips, on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram somewhere where it's somebody who has that profession and they share how they make stuff, and it'll be the most random of shit. Godzilla had a profound cultural impact after its release, and not just in Japan. And not only does the film make people think about the folly of nuclear warfare, but also the environment and the way we treat it. Godzilla also became a pop icon all over the world. Even if you have never seen Godzilla, any of the films, you know who Godzilla is, right? The original 1954 film also paved the way for many, many, many Godzilla films. Some good, some not so good. And in addition to films, there's also video games, all types of merchandise, comic books, just a plethora of shit. And it was also a landmark in Japanese cinema, so you gotta give it up for Godzilla. So sorry this film was so late. Like I said, I was knee deep in a whole different film for this historic film review, and I just completely stopped it to go straight to Godzilla, and I have zero regrets. I really enjoyed creating this video and getting to watch the original 1954 and the 1956 one. It was a good chuckle watching the differences between the two films. But the original film that I was looking at, that'll be a surprise for the next historic film review, so I hope you guys tune in for that one. And also, if you are interested in watching the original 1954 Godzilla, unfortunately, it was way more difficult to find it for free, okay, than I had anticipated. Because, your girl don't like to pay for things if she can avoid it. If you're interested in watching the American 1956 version, that can be found for free online, and I include the link to that as well in the description. Anyway, I give this film an 8 out of 10. Until next time, stay safe out there. Bye.
Perfect.